Welcome to the 14th video in this series, and our theme today is transition living. And first, we need to set the stage. The United Nations report on climate change in the 21st century, published in March 2014, makes some confident predictions for how global climate changes will affect all our lives in the next 50 years or so. It deals mostly with the atmospheric impacts of burning fossil fuels, oil, coal and gas, and the consequences of our now rapidly melting ice caps. Predictions of sea level rise and the impacts on those living in low-lying areas are not new, but the changes are happening much faster than was expected or predicted in the previous report in 2007. Changes in our climate patterns have already become quite severe, and the report suggests that we will all be affected and that we'll all have to take some action to reduce the growing impacts on our atmosphere, while at the same time planning and coping with the consequences. Already, some countries have been taking steps to mitigate problems of flooding, though many will not be able to do the same. However, throughout history, we've been able to make considerable changes in how we live when we have to, so adapt we can. Now, some of you will remember all the effort that was put into ensuring that the world didn't come to a grinding halt at the end of the 20th century. When the year 2000 was about to begin, there was fear that computers around the world would not be able to cope with the jump from 1999 to 2000. Not enough attention had been paid to changing the first two digits in the year. But we were successful. It was a big effort and nothing happened. Planes didn't fall from the sky, and massive information and control networks didn't grind to a halt. However, the task we face today is not just about software. It involves taking action on many fronts as soon as possible and without panic. Now, unlike the year 2000 changeover, there is no one moment to focus on. Our responses will need to be considered and progressive. The challenge will be in preserving the best of what we have and making it better, with more holistic long-term choices. But as we've mentioned before, we can't just change overnight. To use an oil metaphor, it takes a long time to turn a loaded oil tanker around. We've also started to realise that over-sensationalising these issues can tend to stun us, almost paralyse us into inactivity. And this is where transition living movement is an example of how we can start to make appropriate progressive changes to how we live. The term transition living originated in Totnes in the south of England to see if we could find ways to transition away from oil and much of the atmospheric damage we were doing. Remember, parts of Europe have long ago stopped using coal, even with reasonably abundant supplies. So the transition living movement started with a few ordinary first steps, some of which we've mentioned already, working and shopping locally, for example. But transition living is maturing and taking place in many parts of the world. Following the best-selling book Cradle to Cradle, several towns have declared themselves to be cradle-to-cradle towns, perhaps the most successful being Venlo in Holland. In just 7 or 8 years, they've made remarkable progress in town planning, industry and manufacture. They even have something called a stormwater skate park, and all within a living community. So please check out Venlo on Google. But for us now, how do we begin? What are our first steps? Take a moment to reflect on these questions. Did you brush your teeth today? Have you used a pen? Did you perhaps take an aspirin for pain? What shoes are you wearing? How did you get to work or school today? Did you walk? Did you take a bus? Did you drive? All of these questions indirectly relate to our use of oil. While how you used powered transportation to get to places is an obvious use of oil, but we commonly don't think about how many things and activities in our everyday lives require oil. Now, one 42-gallon barrel of oil creates 19.4 gallons of gasoline. The rest is used to make over 6,000 different products. Gasoline powers things like our cars and buses, but oil also helps to make a wide variety of our plastics. And as a result, lots of useful, even essential products, and many others of perhaps questionable merit, that all too soon are not even recycled, finding their way into the waste stream. And the oil that helped to produce them is gone. perhaps forever. Many feel that at the core of our struggles is the concept of peak oil. At some moment, we're going to reach a point where, from that day on, we will have less than half our oil resources left in the ground. We've steadily moved that date forward as we found more sources, or as we found creative ways to get oil out of shale, for example. Unfortunately, we're continuing to use our energy resources faster than ever before. It's been costing more and more to get the stuff out of the ground. As a consequence, market forces will ultimately force the price higher and higher. And we don't want to think about how that could end, unless we transition away from oil dependence long before. Now, our fossil fuel supplies were formed over 90 million years ago and are considered a non-renewable resource because we simply can't regenerate them. We don't have the time or the conditions. Some think we've already reached the point of peak oil, some think it is in the near future, and some think we may never reach that peak. But the question becomes, will it be economically viable or possible to even access and refine the remainder of our supplies? In the 1930s, we received nearly 100 times as much energy from oil than we used to extract it. This quickly decreased to about 30 times in 1970 and only 15 by 2010. Tar sand extraction only produces about 5 times as much energy as it is required for extraction. Fracking has recently been heralded as a cheaper energy process, but there are major concerns over the damage it does to vital underground aquifers, for example. An important aspect of the peak oil concept has been interpreted as, when can we no longer afford to use oil, and not necessarily when will we run out of it. Today, for the vast majority of people, the days of extremely cheap oil are over. And as our use continues to increase, it's time to find viable alternatives. And with the vast infrastructure that supports our use of oil, this will not be an overnight event. Many years ago, the discovery of coal produced an enormous amount of energy as was responsible for massive industrial development. The discovery of oil led to an even greater boom. Without oil, we would lose many of the things that we value in our lives, including our current modes of mass transportation. Our food supplies would be drastically limited. Clothing, textiles, electronics, and even some medicines would no longer be available to us. In North America, most of these products need to be shipped and transported from overseas or in regions where they're cheaper to grow or manufacture. Hence the need to collectively transition away from oil dependence to prepare for a future which respects biological and environmental limits. Through the concept of transition living, the general aim is to reduce our carbon footprints and lead the way to a less energy intensive, more enriching, environmentally respectful and resilient lifestyle. Now, the term resilience is important and describes the ability of a system to absorb shocks and remain stable. The modern Western world is currently quite sensitive to shocks through our reliance on imported products to feed, clothe and shelter ourselves. Relying on sole-sourced imports leaves everyone vulnerable to interruptions in supply. So, transition living focuses on 3 attributes: building resilience, embracing diversity, and increasing modularity. To build resilience, we must examine how we are supporting ourselves and find complementary solutions in case there are shocks to the system. Simple things we can do to increase resilience include localizing our food, energy, and services supply without sole or point sourcing. Diversity is a major component of transition living. We've seen that annual monocropping has wreaked havoc on many of our farmlands, degrading soil quality year after year while producing less and less, unless we use genetically modified seeds while also adding more and more chemical fertilizers. Through diversifying the crops and plants, we would utilize greater crop rotation, as we did before industrialized agriculture, and the soil that we depend on for growth will be allowed to restore itself for its next growing season. Regardless of location, transition communities are trying to grow a variety of crops native to the local climate and ecology. We're already seeing attempts to promote local agriculture with ambitions for enough crop space within city limits to feed the population, such as gardens and greenhouses, and as a consequence, the local economy will be more robust due to greater diversity. Now, these may seem lofty goals, but there's full recognition that not everything can be grown locally, and that seasonality will play a major limiting role. But the core principle is sound. The notion of having everything from everywhere in the world at all times of the year is making less and less sense. Transition living will also likely create a variety of new jobs and will invite a diversity of skills and services to flourish in local markets. Currently, local investment has allowed transition projects to become viable, such as community-owned power production and community car or bike share programs, many of which are successful in many parts of the world today. It's predicted that there will be increased investment in renewable energy with solar thermal water heating or solar voltaic panels on most homes. More people will walk or bike short distances and take public transit instead of driving to work. Composting food and biological waste to be reused as fertilizer to grow food will become commonplace. And saving grey water as water for food crops or flushing the toilet will just become second nature. It's thought that living without oil, or certainly less reliance on it in the first place, will provide a daily satisfaction of accomplishment and community involvement that many people feel is missing in today's consumption-based world. We've mentioned tipping points a few times in the series, and perhaps one or some of these are needed. But for now, there's a city in Brazil that is worthy of our attention. Today, Curitiba is a thriving city of around 2 million people. Some say one of the first smart cities. About 40 years ago, Curitiba appointed Jaime Lerner as their mayor. He was previously a town planner, and what has happened there since is almost legendary. The city first started to clean itself up by buying garbage in bags from the poor, including the children. And previously, the city had spent a lot of money creating dams while trying to control water flow in the area. Instead, it started to let the water flow where it wanted to flow and created areas of natural beauty for recreation. And they learned to build and live around those areas. They also created a network of buses that were fast, easy and convenient. You see, they didn't have the money to build an underground rail system, and buses are more flexible anyway. It's easier to change a route than it is to change a tunnel. They also converted a highway into a pedestrian shopping area in 72 hours and protected it from the initially angry truck drivers by letting children draw and paint in the area on large pieces of paper. And they still do this every week. Today they claim to have the largest downtown pedestrianised shopping area in the world. And they also use a great deal of high technology to monitor the roads, which are much safer even for the many cyclists, while optimising the effectiveness of their public transit network. They collectively take on new challenges as they emerge, always keeping within their budgets and always trying to make the best sense they can of the problems at hand. Brazil's attempts to utilise less polluting biofuels have had mixed success, but they are unafraid to take healthier decisions. And they don't wait until they have all the answers before they start implementing solutions. Everyone's involved and the changes continue. And the world has been watching Curitiba for a long time with growing healthy respect. So check them out on Google and YouTube, and also look for other examples in other parts of the world. Surprisingly, while pollution related to coal use is rising in China, some of the most advanced planning for sustainable energy efficient communities is actually happening right there. Transition living is proving to be a very viable path to follow. But we can't become perfect overnight. However, if we collectively take some simple steps, learn from each other, and from the efforts currently being made elsewhere in the world, it's amazing how much we can accomplish, creating healthier lifestyles and enjoyable places to live. So we'll see you next time when we will talk about the concept in Echoville.